Imagine you're standing in front of a modern office building in downtown Atlanta. Outside the window, you see a booming city. Major corporations are constantly relocating their headquarters here. Hundreds of thousands of young people flock here every year to build their careers. The economic indicators are all green, all rising, all looking great on paper. But if you step out of that building and try to walk to a coffee shop 3 blocks away, you'll immediately understand why Atlanta is one of the strangest stories in American urban history. Because Atlanta isn't a city that failed due to poverty. Not because of a lack of investment. Not because of a lack of talent or vision. Atlanta failed in a different way. A way that makes urban planners around the world stop and look at it as a hard-learned lesson. Atlanta failed because it was designed to fail, and that design was a deliberate decision. The question isn't why Atlanta has traffic jams. The real question is, who decided that and for what purpose? We have to start with the numbers, because the numbers here present an almost absurd contradiction. Between the years 2010 and 2019, the Atlanta metropolitan area welcomed more than 730,000 new residents. To put that in perspective, that's almost the entire population of the city of Seattle, concentrated in one place in less than a decade. Young professionals consistently rank Atlanta as the #1 city for career advancement opportunities. Major American corporations are relentlessly moving their headquarters here. And then you look at another set of data. Atlanta ranks 8th on the list of America's worst cities for traffic delays, 19th globally. The city's walkability score is just 48 out of 100, officially classifying it as car-dependent. Out of 221 major metropolitan areas measured for urban sprawl, Atlanta ranks 220th, almost at the very bottom of the list. It's almost the most sprawling city in America. How did one of the most economically successful cities become one of the most physically unlivable? The answer doesn't start with architecture. It starts with a map and a decision written in black ink on white paper in 1960. To understand that, we have to go back to 1952, when the first sections of Atlanta's downtown connector began to open. This is where Interstate 75 and Interstate 85 meet and run straight through the heart of the city. If you've ever driven through Atlanta, you know what this road looks like. A massive concrete wall with overlapping overpasses, splitting the downtown area into 2 distinct halves. But here's what most people don't know. The route of that highway was never decided based on traffic efficiency. In 1960, a government report explicitly stated that planners understood the proposed route would serve as a dividing line between the white and black communities. They wrote that down. Not an illusion, not an implication, but written explicitly in official planning documents. Racial segregation was presented as a specific goal, cloaked in the language of urban renewal and modernization. The highway wasn't a traffic solution. It was a geographical tool to divide people. And now we begin to see why Atlanta's story isn't simply about bad urban planning. It's the story of geography being used as a weapon. Sweet Auburn was once the most prosperous African-American business district in the entire nation. Not one of the most prosperous, but the most prosperous. This was the center of business, culture, and generational wealth accumulation for the black community. Insurance companies, renowned newspapers, businesses that had survived the Jim Crow era and thrived despite discrimination, all were concentrated here. The highway ran right through it. The community protested. They organized, they lobbied, they fought. In the end, they managed to save a single building. The Atlanta Life Insurance Company headquarters. Just one building. Otherwise, the highway still cut across Auburn Avenue, splitting the community in two and destroying the economic foundation built by generations. At the highway interchange, the Mechanicsville neighborhood was almost completely wiped out. Hundreds of homes and businesses in Summer Hill disappeared under slabs of concrete. And when the numbers were tallied, 89% of the roughly 14,000 people displaced by highway construction in Atlanta were people of color. The official reason given was to solve traffic congestion. But can you guess what happened next? The newly built highways immediately filled with cars. Not because there were more cars, but because every new lane created new demand for travel. This is a phenomenon that transportation economists call induced demand. If you widen a road, cars will fill it. No exceptions. Before the 1996 Olympic Games, the Georgia Department of Transportation decided to widen the downtown connector from 6 lanes to 14 lanes. 14 lanes running through the heart of the city. And traffic was just as bad as before. Nothing changed at all. You'd think that after such an obvious failure, officials would change their strategy. They had concrete proof, right in front of them, that widening roads doesn't solve congestion. But the Georgia Department of Transportation continued to choose highway expansion as the solution for the entire metro area, repeating the same failed strategy for decades on end. Why? And what locked that cycle of failure in place, making it impossible to escape? This is where we need to look at something less noticeable than highways, but possibly even more dangerous. We need to look at Atlanta's land use zoning code. For 35 years after those highways were built, Atlanta operated under a zoning code built on a single assumption. Everyone will drive everywhere for every purpose. The code was written as if the car was the only form of transportation that ever existed and ever would. And here's a number that makes everyone do a double take. 50% of Atlanta's land area is currently zoned exclusively for single-family homes. Not 50% of residential land, but 50% of the city's entire land area, half of everything. This includes land right next to the Beltline, a path marketed as a model for walkable urban development. It includes land right next to MARTA subway stations, where common sense dictates you should build densely so people can use public transit without a car. In any normally functioning city, the areas nearest to public transit would be zoned for apartments, shops, and offices. In Atlanta, the zoning code looks at the places where density makes the most sense and says, no, only single-family homes are allowed. Planners have analysed Atlanta's historic neighbourhoods, the places people love and pay a premium to live in. Those little neighbourhoods with apartments, duplexes, and corner stores where you can walk to get coffee. And they found that most of those beloved neighbourhoods would be illegal to build today under the current zoning code. The city has made it illegal to replicate the very places that work well. When you ban density within the city, growth has to go somewhere. From 2000 to 2010, Atlanta's urbanized area expanded by nearly 35%. This sprawl is the inevitable result of regulations that make true urban development impossible. And then there's the issue of parking. In 1953, downtown Atlanta had 18,570 parking spaces. By 2014, that number had grown to 93,000, a 500% increase in 6 decades. But that number didn't come from people voluntarily building more. Zoning codes required developers to build a specific number of parking spots for every new project. These requirements were so excessive that even mixed-use buildings right next to subway stations had to dedicate a third or more of their space to parking. This created an inescapable economic loop. Land in the city is expensive. If you have to spend a third of your budget on parking, you can't build enough housing or commercial space to make dense urban development profitable. So developers moved to the suburbs, where land was cheaper and parking was easier to build. The zoning code literally pushed development away from the places it should have been concentrated in. But this isn't even the worst part, because all of that, the highways, the zoning codes, the parking requirements, only explains why Atlanta kept sprawling outward. They don't explain what it feels like to be an ordinary person trying to do the simplest thing, walk to the store. Imagine you're walking down a street in Atlanta. There's a sidewalk, it seems fine. You're heading toward the store or wherever you need to go. Then the sidewalk suddenly ends and dumps you right onto the shoulder of the road, where cars are flying by at 70 kilometers an hour. You stand there, looking ahead, wondering whether to risk your life or just turn back. This is not an unusual experience in Atlanta. This is the normal design. Only 46% of potential sidewalk segments actually exist across the city. And the reason why reveals one of the most bizarre policy failures in American urban history. The city delegated the responsibility for building and maintaining sidewalks to individual property owners, meaning the homeowners and businesses on each lot. No unified plan, no unified standard, no unified funding. The result is a completely random network. This house has a perfect concrete sidewalk. The next house has a cracked, potholed mess. The one after that has nothing at all. There's no continuity, no plan, no guarantee that you can complete a journey on your own 2 feet. And if you have any mobility challenges, huge parts of the city are completely off limits to you. The infrastructure necessary to allow people with disabilities to move independently simply does not exist in much of Atlanta. Of course, Atlanta has MARTA, its subway and bus system, but residents report that MARTA feels inaccessible not because the trains don't run, but because there are no sidewalks leading to the stations. You can see the bus stop from your window, but there's no safe way to get to it. People walk in the middle of the road, including children and the elderly, just to get to a bus stop. And here's something about MARTA you'll find in almost no other major American city. MARTA is the only major public transit system in the US that receives zero funding from its state government. The state of Georgia contributes nothing. When MARTA was planned in the 1960s and 70s, the suburban counties were given the choice to opt in and help fund the system. The suburban counties refused, driven by thinly veiled fears that public transit would bring crime or vagrants from the city. What they really meant was that they didn't want black residents from Atlanta having easy access to their communities. This forced MARTA to rely almost entirely on sales taxes collected from city residents to fund a system that couldn't expand into the booming suburbs where it was needed most. With no state funding, MARTA remained small. The system couldn't expand into the growing suburbs where millions of people were moving. And this is where everything connects in a way that, once you see it, you can't unsee it. The suburbs kept sprawling. Millions of people have no choice but to drive. Cars fill the highways. Traffic congestion leads officials to keep expanding highways. Highway expansion creates more demand for travel. More travel demand fuels more suburban development. More suburban development makes public transit less and less viable. Less viable public transit means more people need to drive. And the loop continues, unbroken. Each element feeds every other element, creating a dysfunctional cycle that seems impossible to escape. And this is the most important thing to understand about Atlanta. This was not an accident. The machinery behind Atlanta's dysfunction isn't incompetence or accidental short-sightedness. Urban design is the physical manifestation of societal values. And Atlanta, from the 1950s to the 1980s, manifested a very specific set of values. White suburban families would be able to drive into the city for work, then retreat to their racially segregated neighborhoods at night. Dense urban life would be discouraged or legally prohibited. Public transit would be underfunded, unable to expand to where it might break down those geographic lines. The entire system, from the placement of the highways, to the zoning code, to the public transit funding mechanisms, was built to maintain segregation while allowing for economic activity in the downtown core. That vision failed completely, but not in the way you might expect. What Atlanta got instead of neat separation was a city that functions poorly for almost everyone. Commuting is miserable regardless of race or income. Housing is increasingly expensive, as demand concentrates in the few walkable neighborhoods left after decades of systematic destruction. And the segregation this system was meant to create hasn't held up as planned, but the economic inequality it left behind is stark. When we piece it all together, we start to see a clearer picture of how a city can be broken at the deepest level. Geography is the foundation. The topography of the Atlanta region, vast and flat, with no natural barriers like an ocean, a bay, or mountains, to force density, like in New York, San Francisco, or Chicago, allowed for endless physical dispersal. But geography isn't destiny. It is the condition that makes decisions possible. Those decisions are shaped by history. A city fresh off of legal segregation, with all the fear and animosity that creates, will codify that fear and animosity into policy. The highways are geographic weapons. The zoning code is a legal wall. The decision to underfund public transit is an economic barrier. Economics amplifies everything. When urban development is made financially impossible within the city limits, through zoning and parking requirements, capital flows to the suburbs. Capital followed the suburbs. People followed the capital. And the system reinforces itself. Geopolitics keeps the cycle going. Politicians in suburban counties have a voter base that doesn't want to fund public transit. State officials have little reason to challenge the conventional wisdom about highways. So the same bad decisions get repeated for decades. And now, Atlanta is trying to reverse all of that. The city is pursuing a complete rewrite of its zoning code, trying to shift from suburban rules to truly urban regulations. The goal is to allow for density, eliminate minimum parking requirements, and enable walkable neighborhoods. This is basically an admission that 35 years of zoning policy were wrong from the start. Then there's the Stitch, a proposal to bury the northern portion of the Central Freeway underneath a cap and create 14 acres of green space on top. This will reconnect street grids that were severed in the 1950s and stitch back together divided neighborhoods. The most optimistic cost estimate for the Stitch is $300 million. A separate project to cap a stretch of freeway in Midtown is estimated at $1 billion. Atlanta is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to buy back basic urban function that was intentionally destroyed 70 years ago. Before the freeways tore them apart, Atlanta had connected neighborhoods, walkable streets, and thriving commercial districts. Now Atlanta is paying a colossal fee to recreate what it once had for free. MARTA is also finally getting serious investment through the More MARTA Atlanta program, $2.7 billion over 40 years, focused on bus rapid transit and other transportation modes. This is the largest transit investment in 4 decades, and it's also the clearest signal of just how far behind Atlanta has fallen. Other cities have consistently invested in public transit for generations. Atlanta starved its system for so long that it now needs billions of dollars just to approach basic functionality. Every fix is trying to retrofit urbanism onto a suburban framework that was never designed to support it. And each fix is proving, in real dollar costs, that bad designs aren't just abstract mistakes. They are financial liabilities passed on to future generations. The demand to live and work in Atlanta isn't going away. The city's economic advantages are real. Companies keep moving in. Young people keep choosing the city. The job market remains strong. But every year without change is a year of lost productivity, worsening inequality, and accumulating costs over time. Zoning rewrites, highway caps, transit investments, sidewalk construction. These billion-dollar projects are just the beginning of what will likely be a multi-generational effort to undo the damage. And this is the final thing that Atlanta's story forces us to confront. Atlanta was never destined to be this way. The dysfunction wasn't the inevitable result of growth. It wasn't an unavoidable consequence of flat geography or the South's car-friendly climate. It was the result of specific decisions made by specific people in service of specific goals. Those decisions were chosen, and now, decades later, Atlanta is spending billions to undo those choices and build the city that should have existed all along. The real question isn't whether Atlanta can fix itself. The real question is, how many other cities are living with designs built to serve a long-failed social vision, but haven't yet realized that they're paying the price for it every single day? And if it took Atlanta 70 years to even begin to recognize the problem, how many more decades will it take to actually fix it?